You arrive not at a city or a castle, but at the edge of a wide, open countryside where the day has nearly spent itself. The sun lowers behind rolling fields, brushing the horizon with soft fire, while the coolness begins to spread through the air. You walk slowly along a dirt track, uneven beneath your feet, the earth hard-packed by hooves and carts. The smells of the day linger: cut hay, dung, wood smoke, drifting lazily from chimneys in the distance. It is evening in the Middle Ages, and you are stepping into the life of a peasant, simple, hard, but steady. The village appears ahead, small and low to the ground, as if it wants to hide itself in the folds of the land. Roofs of thatch slope downward like worn cloaks, smoke curling thinly from holes cut in the reeds. Walls lean with age, timber frames patched with wattle and daub. A few chickens scratch in the dust, their soft clucks carrying faintly in the cooling air. The day's labor is done, and the village exhales a tired breath that seems to join the evening itself. You pause at the edge of a field, rows of stubble cut short after the harvest. Beyond, the land stretches unbroken to the tree line, already shadowed and thick. The peasants who work these fields are now gathering at home, their backs bent, not from the weight of the day alone, but from the habit of years. You picture them walking slowly along the same path, their tools balanced across their shoulders, a wooden hoe, a dull iron blade, a basket half filled with turnips. They speak little. Words are not needed after so many hours of repetition. Their silence is not cold, but companionable, part of the rhythm of their lives. The bell from a small church tower rings in the distance, its tone uneven, a simple iron clapper striking against bronze. It calls, not for work now, but for prayer. For the evening gathering where villagers murmur Latin words they do not fully understand, yet which frame their days with meaning. The sound drifts across the fields, mingling with the call of a crow flying overhead, wings heavy against the dimming sky. You breathe more slowly, as though the bell itself has quieted your pulse. You step closer to the cottages. The doors are open to the evening, letting the smoke from hearths escape. Inside, the firelight glows dimly, catching the edges of rough walls. A child's voice carries out, high, bright, insistent. A mother hushes it quickly, her own tone weary but tender. A man coughs, the sound deep and raw, before settling into silence again. This is not a place of comfort in the way you might expect. It is cramped, smoky, and dark. Yet within it lies the heart of peasant life. Family crowded together, enduring, sharing warmth, clinging to the same soil that feeds them and binds them. The ground beneath your feet crunches with scattered straw. You smell damp wool, turned earth, and the acrid sting of dung heaps piled behind the huts. But with the unpleasant scents comes also the sweetness of bread baking on stones inside ovens, the faint tang of ale fermenting in wooden tubs, the comforting spice of smoke. These smells are not decoration, they are survival. They tell you that though the day was hard, the peasants will eat, drink, and rest before another dawn calls them back to the fields. The evening settles deeper, the sky shading from orange to indigo. A dog barks once, then curls into the dirt, its eyes half closed but still alert. A few villagers linger outside their homes, speaking in low tones, their voices carrying accents shaped by centuries of rootedness to this soil. They talk of weather, of lords, of next season's harvest, their words slow and careful. They know how fragile their lives are, how easily a bad season can tip into hunger. You sense it in their posture, not fearful, but resigned, shoulders bowed beneath the invisible weight of the land. As you stand quietly among them, you notice how the evening offers no rush. There's no sound of wheels, no lanterns swinging down busy streets, no merchants hawking goods, only the steady hum of crickets in the hedges, the occasional creak of timber, the faint sigh of the wind as it slips through thatch. Time here is measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of light and dark, work and rest, bell and silence. If you let yourself fall into that rhythm too, your breath slowing, your thoughts loosening. A child runs past, bare feet kicking up dust, before being called back sharply by a mother's voice. The child pauses, shoulders drooping, then trudges obediently inside. The door closes with a dull thud. One by one, other doors shut as well. The village grows quieter, the fires within glowing like faint lanterns beneath the thatch. Outside, only the animals remain. Chickens roosting, a cow shifting its weight in the pen, the dog now sleeping fully. The night belongs to them as much as to the people. You take one last look at the horizon. The fields stretch outward, already fading into shadow. Beyond them lies the Lord's manor, its walls of stone faintly visible in the twilight, higher, stronger, unshaken by the day's labor. The peasants will never live there, but it looms always, a reminder of duty, of rent, of power. You tuck the thought away. For now, you remain in the village, where the huts glow faintly and the smell of bread drifts into the night air. The day has ended. The peasants rest in their smoky huts, their tools propped by the door, their bodies aching but still. The bell has fallen silent. The night takes its place. You, too, settle into that stillness, letting the cool medieval evening wrap around you like a coarse but sturdy cloak. Here begins the life of a peasant, a life shaped by soil, by hardship, by endurance. You step softly toward one of the cottages, its doorway low and narrow, its roofline stooping as if tired from holding itself up through too many winters. This is the peasant's hut, the ordinary home of the Middle Ages. It is small, rough, and smoky. Yet it holds all that a family owns: their warmth, their food, their rest. To enter is to step into the core of medieval life, close and unembellished. The walls are not stone, but timber frames packed with wattle and daub, thin branches woven like a basket, chaise plastered over with a mixture of clay, mud, and straw. You run your fingers lightly along the surface and thought. It crumbles easily, gritty and uneven. Rain has washed grooves into it, and smoke has darkened it near the doorway. Yet it stands, stubbornly keeping out the wind. For peasants, durability mattered more than beauty. If it held against weather, it was enough. The roof above is thick with thatch, bundles of straw layered tightly so that rain runs down instead of through. It smells faintly sweet, dry, but tinged with smoke from years of fires below. Birds sometimes nest in its eaves, their wings rustling softly at dawn. Mice scurry through its hollows, unseen but heard. In summer, the roof keeps out heat. In winter, it traps warmth, though drafts still slip easily through. You imagine lying beneath it at night, listening to the thatch creak faintly as the wind presses against it, the sounds of nature never fully sealed away. Inside, the hut is dim. There are no glass windows, only small slits or holes covered by shutters. The only true light comes from the central hearth, a shallow pit of smoldering wood and charcoal. Smoke curls upward, but does not leave entirely. There is no chimney, only a gap in the roof. The air is thick, stinging your eyes, coating the rafters with soot. The smell of wood smoke permeates everything: clothing, bedding, hair. Yet it is a necessary discomfort, for without fire, there would be no warmth, no cooked food, no light at all. The floor beneath your feet is bare earth, packed hard by years of use. It is uneven, scattered with straw to soften the tread and soak up spills. When it rains heavily, water seeps inside, forming shallow puddles that slowly dry by the heat of the fire. In winter, the ground is cold, pulling warmth from bare feet. In summer, it is dusty, clinging to ankles. The earth floor is a constant reminder that peasants live as close to the soil inside as they do outside. Furniture is sparse. A rough wooden table, scarred by knives and scorched by hot pots, stands near the hearth. Around it, low stools or benches offer places to sit. Beds are not separate for each person, but shared. Wooden frames stuffed with straw, covered by coarse woolen blankets. Children sleep together at one end, parents at the other. Infants rest in a simple cradle, rocked by foot while work continues. Privacy does not exist here. All lives are lived openly within sight and sound of one another. Along the walls hang tools and baskets. Hoe leans against one corner, its blade dull but serviceable. Sickle hangs by a peg, its curve sharp enough for the harvest. A clay jug sits near the fire, its rim chipped but still holding ale. Above, strings of onions or garlic dangle from rafters, drying in the smoke. Every item is practical. There is no excess, no decoration, beyond perhaps a wooden cross, carved roughly, reminding the family of faith in the rhythm of holy days. Animals often share this space. At night, chickens may roost in a corner, their feathers ruffling in the dim light. A pig might be brought in during winter, grunting softly, its body adding warmth. The mingling of people and animals is not choice, but necessity. The hut is shelter for all. The smell is strong, straw, manure, sweat, but it is familiar, a background that no one notices after a while. It is the smell of survival. The hut is crowded, parents, children, sometimes grandparents, all under the same roof. Their lives overlap constantly, voices speaking over one another. Children crying, parents working, the scrape of knives on wood, the crackle of fire. At night, all lie down together, the sound of breathing filling the dark. The closeness can feel heavy, but it also binds them. Alone, no one would endure the cold, the hunger, the labor. Together, they endure. You imagine yourself seated near the hearth, a wooden bowl in your hands, eating thick porridge of barley. The spoon is carved roughly, the porridge bland, but it warms you after a day outside. A child leans sleepily against your side. Sparks rise from the fire, floating briefly before vanishing into smoke. The walls close in, but not harshly. They cradle the family, worn though they are. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, the hut holds steady, just enough against the vastness of the world. The hut is humble, even harsh, but it is also steady. It does not promise comfort, only shelter. It does not promise wealth, only survival. Within its walls, peasants lived entire lives, born, raised, married, aged, and buried, all without ever leaving its shadow. To step inside is to step into the center of their existence, where every detail spoke of hardship, but also of endurance. The night in the peasant's hut is short. Rest comes, but it is never luxurious. The air is smoky, the straw mattress prickles, and the warmth of bodies pressed together makes sleep shallow. Outside, the sounds of the medieval countryside never truly stop. Dogs bark now and then. A cow shifts in its pen. The wind pushes gently through thatch. And then, before you are ready, dawn begins its call. The first sound is not a bell, but the rooster. Its sharp cry cuts through the dimness, reminder that the sun has not yet broken the horizon, but the day is already demanding. Soon, other roosters join, answering across fields, their voices overlapping in uneven chorus. The animals stir before the people. Pigs grunt softly, chickens rustle, a cow lowing impatiently to be milked. The family wakes in pieces, a child whimpering, a parent coughing, someone shifting heavily on the straw bed. There is no choice but to rise. Work waits, and work does not forgive lateness. The hearth is rekindled from the previous night's embers. Smoke thickens again, curling upward, filling the rafters. The smell of smoldering wood clings to everything. A woman bends low, blowing gently on the coals, sparks flaring briefly before flames catch. Pot is set on the fire, not for a feast, but for thin porridge made from barley or oats, or perhaps rye bread baked days ago and now softened with ale. The meal is plain, but it fills the stomach enough to face the labor ahead. Outside, the sky lightens from black to gray, and then, slowly, to pale blue. Mist clings to the fields, dew wetting every stalk of grass. The village stirs, one hut after another, opening its door, figures stepping out, stretching stiff limbs. You hear the clank of wooden pails, the slap of sandals against damp earth, low voices of neighbors exchanging brief greetings. No one lingers in conversation. The rhythm of the day pushes them forward. Soon, the church bell joins the rooster's cry. Its tone is uneven, its sound carrying farther than any human voice. The bell marks not just the hour, but the order of life itself. It tells peasants when to rise, when to pray, when to rest, when to return. In its ring lies both faith and discipline. You feel it settle into your body, a sound that cannot be ignored. It is less an invitation than a command. Begin the day, and begin it now. The men head toward the fields with tools slung across their shoulders. Hoes, scythes, crude wooden plows waiting for oxen. Their bodies move with practiced rhythm, not rushed, but not slow, as though the weight of habit carries them. The women tend animals first, milking cows, feeding chickens, turning pigs loose to forage. Then they return inside, weaving, spinning, kneading dough, patching clothes. Children help where they can, gathering eggs, fetching water from the well, scaring birds away from seedlings. Even the smallest hands are needed. The morning is relentless, yet strangely calm. There is no question of where the work will be done. Okay, it must be. Crops wait for no one. The soil must be turned, the seeds sown, the weeds pulled. A misday is not inconvenience, but danger, food lost, hunger increased. This certainty steadies the peasants, even as it exhausts them. Their lives are measured not by choice, but by necessity. You imagine standing in the fields at dawn, the mist lifting slowly, the first warmth of sun touching your face. Okay? Oxen breathe clouds of steam as they pull wooden plows, their hooves sinking deep into mud. Men call to them in short, guttural commands, voices carrying across the open land. Behind them, furrows stretch in long lines, the smell of fresh earth rising into the air. Birds swoop low, searching for worms and seeds disturbed by the plow. The rhythm of the land has begun again, the same as yesterday, the same as tomorrow. Back in the village, the bell rings once more, calling briefly to prayer. For a moment, hoes are set down, heads bound, murmured words rising together. The Latin phrases are half understood, yet the repetition is comfort. Faith weaves itself into labor, inseparable. When the bell stops, the tools are lifted again, and the rhythm resumes. The peasant's dawn is not peaceful in the way of leisure, but it is steady, predictable, rooted. To live by bells and roosters is to live by nature and ritual combined. Do you feel that rhythm in your own breath? The inhale of rising, the exhale of labor, the steady repetition that leaves little room for doubt. The morning pulls you forward as it pulled them into a day that will be long, hard, and unchanging. Yet, within that hardness lies a kind of certainty, the kind that allows thought to soften, to rest, even in motion. You follow the peasants out into the fields, the soil still damp from the night's dew, the air carrying the sharp smell of turned earth. This is the heart of their existence, the fields stretching outward in long strips, some freshly plowed, others waiting for seed, others lying fallow. Every ridge, every furrow, every clump of mud holds their survival. To step into these fields is to step into the rhythm that rules their lives more than any lord or priest, the rhythm of the soil. The tools they carry are simple, their edges dulled by years of use. A hoe of wood and iron. The iron blade, small and fragile by modern standards, but heavy in the hand of the one who wields it all day. A sickle, curved like a crescent moon, its teeth catching stalks of barley and wheat. A spade with a handle smoothed by countless palms. Oh my. These tools are not many, nor are they efficient, but they are all the peasants have, and they know how to use them with a patience born of necessity. The most important tool is the plow. It is not of gleaming metal, but mostly wood, its frame bound by ropes, its point sometimes tipped with a small piece of iron. It is crude, heavy, and stubborn. Without animals, it would be nearly impossible to pull. That is why oxen are prized, more valuable to the village than almost anything else. Broad-shouldered, slow, steady, they lean into the harness, their hooves sinking into the soft ground, their breath steaming in the morning air. A man walks behind, guiding the plow, the handles jolting with every stone and root beneath the soil. His shoulders ache, his hands blister, but the furrows stretch out steadily, one line after another, until the field lies open and ready. You pause to watch the rhythm. The oxen pull. The man calls in a deep, steady tone. The plow cuts. The soil rolls aside in dark waves. Behind, another worker scatters seed by hand, letting grain fall from a sack slung across his chest. His movements are wide and slow, his arms swinging in arcs, the seed falling unevenly but plentifully. Later, others follow with rakes or branches, brushing soil over the seed, tucking it into earth where it can root. Nothing is hurried, yet nothing pauses. The field becomes a kind of chant, each step another verse, each movement another refrain. The peasants' hands tell the story more clearly than their tools. Calloused, cracked, darkened by sun and soil, they carry the marks of constant work. Fingers bent, nails thick with dirt, palms rough as bark. A lifetime of gripping wood, pulling ropes, hauling baskets. These hands will never be soft. They are shaped by the land as surely as the furrows are, and yet within their roughness lies skill. The way they guide the plow with just enough force, the way they scatter seed in arcs, the way they weed without tearing the fragile roots of crops. These hands are not only strong, but precise, taught by repetition until muscle remembers what mind does not need to think. The fields themselves are organized not in small squares, but in long strips, shared among villagers. Each peasant family has its strips scattered across the land, some fertile, some poor, some near water, some further away. It is not convenience, but fairness. No one gets only the best soil. Each family must work both good and bad, their survival tied to the collective rhythm of the village. You picture men and women bending side by side, their tools biting into neighboring strips, their conversations rising and falling as steady as the plow. The seasons dictate their work. In spring, plowing and sowing. In summer, endless weeding, long days under the sun, sweat stinging the eyes, backs bent for hours. In autumn, harvest, the quick, urgent cutting of grain before weather spoils it, the stacking of sheaves, the threshing with flails, the winnowing of chaff. In winter, less field work, but still endless tasks, mending tools, feeding animals, repairing roofs, weaving, spinning. The field sleeps, but the peasants do not. You kneel in the soil in thought, running your hand over the fresh furrow. It is cool, damp, crumbly, smelling of life hidden within. Worms wriggle away from the light. A seed, dropped here, may sprout in days. It is fragile, easily destroyed by drought or flood, pest or frost. Yet it is all the peasants have. Their hunger depends on these furrows, their future written in the texture of the soil. No castle wall, no church tower, no crown in a distant city matters more than this strip of earth. You feel the weight of that truth pressing gently, as steady as the oxen's hooves. The day stretches on. Sweat darkens the peasants' woolen tunics. Soil cakes their ankles. Shoulders ache from guiding the plow. But the rhythm continues. Pull, cut, scatter, cover. The sun climbs, and still they move. There is no end to the field, only the pause of dusk. And tomorrow, they will do it again. The fieldwork stretches long, and hunger shadows every movement. For peasants in the Middle Ages, food is never taken for granted. It is plain, repetitive, often gritty between the teeth, but it is survival. When you step back from the furrows and follow a peasant home at midday, you see how the table mirrors the soil. Modest, hard-earned, yet steady enough to keep life moving. The center of every meal is bread. Not the soft, white bread of nobility, but coarse loaves baked from rye, barley, or oats, sometimes mixed with beans or peas when grain was scarce. The flour is ground between heavy millstones, and grit often creeps into the dough. With each bite, teeth grind not only grain, but stone dust. Over years, enamel wears thin, jaws ache, and mouths show the toll. Yet the bread fills the belly, and that is enough. Its crust is thick, dark, smoky from the oven, its interior heavy and dense. You picture a woman pulling a loaf from a clay oven, her hands wrapped in rough cloth. The smell of hot bread filling the hut, even as smoke stings the eyes. Alongside bread comes porridge, boiled from whatever grain is cheapest or most plentiful. It's barley, oats, millet, each simmered slowly in a pot hanging over the hearth. A barge is thick, almost glue-like, with little flavor beyond the grain itself. Sometimes it is salted, sometimes sweetened with a drizzle of honey if a hive is found, but most often it is plain. Children eat it in wooden bowls, scooping it with spoons or dipping crusts of bread. For them, it is filling. For adults, it is sustenance, a fuel for the next hours of labor. Ale flows as freely as water. In fact, more safely than water. Okay? Brewed from barley, it is weak by modern standards, but thick, cloudy, and nourishing. Even children drink it, their small hands gripping crude clay mugs. The taste is sour, earthy, slightly bitter. It quenches thirst after hours in the field, and it provides calories to replace what the body spends in labor. You imagine sitting at the low table, lifting a mug to your lips, feeling the liquid heavy and warm, settling in your stomach like a second kind of bread. On some days, there is more. It's a scrap of cheese, sharp and salty. Its edge is cracked. It's a few eggs gathered from hens, fried quickly on a flat stone. A handful of beans boiled until soft, their skins splitting in the pot. If the season is generous, there may be cabbage or leeks, roots pulled from the earth, turnips roasted until sweet in the fire's embers. These vegetables bring color to the bowl, but they are not abundant. Hunger is always near, and meals often repeat the same plain foods until even the thought of them feels heavy. Meat is rare. A rabbit caught in a snare, a hen too old to lay, a pig slaughtered at year's end. On feast days or special occasions, the village might share a larger animal, roasting it whole, the fat sizzling and dripping into flames. But most days, meat is absent. A thin broth might carry the flavor of bones, but the bones themselves are gnawed until hollow. The rich feast at tables of venison and beef, while peasants chew hard crusts and drink ale as thick as soup. Still, meals are moments of pause. The family gathers on benches around the wooden table. A mother ladles porridge into bowls. A father slices the bread with a dull knife. Children pass mugs clumsily between them. The fire crackles, shadows flicker against soot-darkened walls. Outside, the fields wait, but inside, there is a brief calm. Hunger is not silenced, but it is quieted, at least for a while. You imagine the sound of chewing, the scrape of spoons, the occasional low murmur of conversation. Words are few, saved for what matters: the weather, the crops, the obligations to the Lord. Meals are not about delight, but necessity. Yet there is comfort in routine. The bread may be coarse, the ale sour, but they come each day. Predictability itself is a kind of gift. In lean years, the meals thin further. The bread is stretched with ground acorns or chestnuts, bitter and hard. Porridge is watered down until it is little more than gray liquid. Ale weakens, its flavor fading. Bellies rumble louder. Children cry at night. The memory of famine lingers in every hut, a shadow that never truly lifts. To peasants, every bite is measured against the fear of hunger's return. And so, each crust of bread, no matter how rough, carries a quiet gratitude. You let yourself sit at that low table, the smoke stinging, the bread rough between your fingers. You taste the sourness of ale, the heaviness of porridge, the plainness of boiled cabbage. It is not a feast, but it is enough to stand again, to walk back into the fields, to keep the rhythm of life going. And in the silence of the hut, broken only by the crackle of fire and the sigh of weary breath, you feel the endurance hidden in every mouthful. When you step back outside the smoky hut, your eyes adjust again to the gray daylight, and you notice what peasants wear. Their clothing is not a matter of style or vanity, but of necessity. Every garment has been spun, woven, and sewn by hand, made from what the land provides and what the household can afford. To live as a medieval peasant is to feel your clothes always against you. Rough, coarse, never quite comfortable, but always there as protection against wind, rain, and labor. The base of most clothing is linen. Grown from flax, it is spun into thread by women sitting near the fire, their fingers working spindle and distaff with practiced rhythm. The linen is woven into cloth on narrow looms, producing a fabric pale in color, sometimes yellowed, sometimes gray. It is not smooth like fine silk, but stiff with an uneven weave. Shirts and undergarments are cut from it, simple rectangles sewn together with coarse thread. Against the skin, it scratches faintly, especially when new, softening only after long wear. A peasant does not expect comfort, only durability. Over the linen comes wool. Sheep graze in the pastures, their fleece sheared each spring. The wool is greasy with lanolin, washed in cold streams, then carded into soft tufts. Women spin it into yarn, their wheels or spindles turning slowly as conversations murmur in the background. The yarn is woven into cloth, thick and heavy. From this, tunics and cloaks are cut. The wool smells faintly of sheep even after washing, especially when damp. In rain, the lanolin helps shed water, but the weight increases, dragging at shoulders. Still, wool is the peasant's best defense against cold. A long woolen cloak, pinned at the neck with a simple brooch or tied with a cord, becomes both blanket and shield. Men wear tunics of wool, belted at the waist, reaching to the knee or mid-thigh. Over the tunic, a cloak if the weather demands. Their legs are covered with hose, not fitted stockings, but long strips of cloth wound tightly, tied at the knee, patched and repatched. Their feet are shoved into leather shoes, rough and stiff, sometimes stuffed with straw for warmth. Thick shoes crack, split, and leak, but they are repaired again and again, all stitched with thick thread until they finally crumble. Then, another pair is fashioned, simple, without ornament, cut roughly from hides. Women wear longer tunics, their hems brushing mud as they work in fields or yards. Over them, aprons of linen, stained with bread dough or soil. On their heads, kerchiefs or veils of coarse cloth, tied simply, both for modesty and to keep hair from straw and smoke. Hands are rarely gloved, except in bitter winter. Skin hardens instead, thickening until it no longer feels the sting of nettles or the bite of rope. Children are dressed in miniature versions of adult clothes, though more ragged, patched constantly as they grow. A tunic shortened when it becomes too worn at the hem, a cloak inherited from an older sibling. Their bare feet slap in the dirt most of the year, shoes too precious to waste on growing bodies. Only in winter are their toes wrapped in scraps of wool or leather, tied with cord. Dyes exist, but color is rare. Most garments are undyed, the off-white of linen, the gray, brown, or muddy green of wool. If a family is lucky, they may add plant dyes, yellows from weld, reds from madder, soft blues from woad. These colors fade quickly, leaving the fabric muted. Bright, rich hues belong to lords, merchants, and clergy. For peasants, clothing is the palette of earth itself. Browns of soil, greens of pasture, grays of smoke. To look at a village gathering is to see a landscape dressed in cloth. The texture of peasant clothing shapes their days. The wool itches in heat, clings when wet, grows heavy with sweat. Linen scratches until it softens with use. Leather shoes rub blisters, split seams, let in water. Yet there is comfort in familiarity. These garments are part of the body, worn until they can no longer hold together, then patched, resewn, or turned into rags. Nothing is wasted. Old tunics become bedding, scraps become bandages, threads are pulled for repairs. The cycle is endless, just like the fields themselves. You imagine the sound of a household preparing clothes, the creak of the loom as wooden beams press threads into cloth, the hiss of a knife cutting strips, the murmur of a woman sewing by firelight, her needle flashing faintly in the glow. Clothing is not purchased quickly, but built slowly, hour by hour, season by season. It's where it is to carry not only fabric, but time, the countless hours spun into every thread. As the day stretches on, you watch peasants bend in the fields, their tunics darkened with sweat, their cloaks heavy with mud. They move despite discomfort, their clothes like a second skin, not questioned, not resented, simply accepted. You feel the wool scratch at your own arms in thought, the linen stick into your chest, the shoes pinching your toes. It is not pleasant, but it grounds you. You are of the earth, dressed in its colors, bearing its textures. At night, the same garments are often worn to bed, cloaks doubled as blankets, tunics now removed. Only rarely are clothes washed, the water precious, the work immense. The smell of sweat and smoke lingers, woven into the fibers until it is inseparable. And yet, when dawn comes again, the peasants rise, tie their belts, fasten their cloaks, can return to the fields in the same clothing. Day after day, season after season, until the fabric itself becomes part of them. You let yourself breathe slowly, imagining the scratch of wool at your neck, the heaviness of damp shoes, the smell of smoke trapped in cloth. It is uncomfortable, but steady. Just as the soil feeds the body, these garments shield it. Neither offers luxury, but both endure. The fields, the huts, the bread, the wool. None of these belong fully to the peasants themselves. Behind every loaf, every furrow, every sheaf of grain lies obligation. To live in the Middle Ages as a peasant is not only to endure hard work, but also to surrender a large part of its fruits. Over all hovers the manor, the Lord, and the church, each with claims on what little a family can produce. You imagine the manor rising just beyond the village, built of stone rather than timber, its hall higher and warmer than any peasant hut. The Lord himself may not appear often, but his presence is constant, carried by stewards, reeves, and bailiffs who collect what is owed. His power is visible in walls, gates, and men-at-arms, reminders that the land you till is not yours, but his. The rent owed to the Lord is not paid in coins, for peasants rarely have any. Instead, it is paid in labor and in kind. Each week, peasants must leave their own strips of field to work the domain, the Lord's land, often the most fertile. They rise before dawn, just as they do for their own crops. But the harvests they gather there will never fill their families' bowls. Instead, they fill the granaries of the manor. A man guiding the Lord's plow feels the same blisters, the same strain in his shoulders, yet the yield belongs to another. Beyond labor, there are dues. A certain share of grain, a portion of eggs, a young pig at season's end, what gathered from the forest must be surrendered in part. Honey from a hive, wool from sheep, even the catch of a net thrown in the stream, all may be claimed as rent. The peasants give because they must, because refusal would mean fines, beatings, or worse. They give because the land itself, without which they would starve, is loaned to them only under these terms. The church takes its share as well. 1/10 of all harvests is owed as tithe. Barley measured, sheaves counted, lambs tallied. Even in hunger, even in famine, the church demands its 10th. To peasants, this is not merely obligation, but spiritual insurance, a payment to God as much as to priest. They may grumble, but they surrender the grain, piling it in the church's storehouse, watching their own baskets grow lighter. In return, they receive ritual, prayers, the promise of salvation, and the faint comfort that even hardship is part of God's order. Other duties press down too. When roads must be repaired, peasants provide the labor. When bridges need timber, peasants provide the wood. When the manor demands carts for transport, peasants provide their oxen. Each task comes with no choice, only the silent weight of expectation. Even small moments of life carry fees. To grind grain at the mill, peasants must pay the miller, who in turn pays the Lord. To bake bread in the communal oven, a fee must be given. To marry, to inherit, to move, all require the Lord's permission, often accompanied by payment. A peasant's life is measured not just by seasons of labor, but by a constant giving away of what little is earned. And yet, despite the burden the system holds, the peasants endure because they must, and because in return, the Lord offers something as well: protection. His manor, his men-at-arms, his walls, his weapons, these shield the village, ever, imperfectly, against raiders, outlaws, and rival lords. The peasants may never see battle themselves, but they know their huts would burn quickly without the shadow of the manor nearby. So they surrender their rent, their tithes, their labor, binding themselves into the web of feudal obligation. You imagine standing at the edge of the manor's hall, watching peasants shuffle forward with baskets, sacks, and animals. A reeve stands ready, counting, noting, collecting. The peasants do not speak much, their faces tired, their hands rough, their backs bent beneath loads. They set down their dues, nod curtly, and turn away. For them, this is not an event, but a rhythm, part of the cycle as predictable as sowing and harvest. The weight of these obligations lies heavily on their lives. A poor harvest means not only hunger, but also debt, for the dues must be paid regardless. A missed duty can bring punishment, fines added to what is already owed. Freedom is narrow, choices are few. To live as a peasant is to live always under claim, your own survival balanced against the demands of Lord and church alike. And yet, they find ways to endure. Families share what remains. Neighbors help one another in lean times. Faith softens the bitterness, framing duty as part of divine order. Some peasants sing while they work the domain, their voices carrying across the fields, turning obligation into shared rhythm. They accept what cannot be changed, and in acceptance, they find a kind of resilience. As you walk away from the manor in thought, you feel the weight of those duties pressing softly on your own shoulders. Rent, tithe, labor, the endless giving of what little you have. And yet, like the peasants, you continue to move forward, step by step, knowing that even in hardship, the rhythm of life holds steady. In the midst of toil, obligation, and hunger, the peasant's life is held together by another rhythm, that of the church. Its tower, modest though it may be, rises above the village, its bell pulling time into order. To live in the Middle Ages is to live not by clocks, but by bells and seasons, each one tying body and spirit to a framework greater than the fields. The first sound of morning, after the rooster, is the bell. Its tone carries across the misty fields, uneven but commanding. It calls peasants to prayer before they head into their labor, reminding them that their sweat and hunger are not just duties to Lord and land, but part of God's design. The Latin words spoken inside may not be understood, yet the ritual itself brings familiarity. Kneeling on hard floors, the smell of incense curling faintly in the air. The peasants bowed their heads. Their bodies ache from yesterday's work, but for a moment they are lifted into rhythm beyond their own. The bell marks the hours throughout the day. Prime, terce, sext, none. Each divides time, each offering pause, however brief, from endless labor. When the bell tolls, a hoe may rest in the furrow, a plow be halted midfield. Hands fold in prayer, lips whisper words carried more by repetition than by comprehension. Then the bell falls silent, and work resumes. Even fatigue bends to its command. Sundays bring a deeper pause. On the Lord's Day, fields are left untouched, tools set aside. Families walk slowly to the church, their clothes brushed clean of dirt as best as possible. Children shepherded forward. Inside, the air is cool and shadowed, lit only by narrow windows in the glow of candles. The priest chants the Mass, his voice rising and falling, filling the small stone space. The words are distant, in a language not theirs, but the peasants know when to kneel, when to stand, when to cross themselves. The patterns matter more than the meanings. The rhythm becomes prayer in itself. Holy days scatter through the year, punctuating hardship with moments of rest and gathering. Feast days of saints, the long fasts of Lent, the celebrations of Easter and Christmas. These days do not erase hunger or labor, but they reshape them. A holy day means fewer hours in the fields, more time together, perhaps meat shared, ale brewed stronger. On festivals, the churchyard becomes a place of laughter, games, music, rare light in lives so often dim. Children chase one another around gravestones, women share gossip, men join in songs. The church, stern though it is, offers these intervals of humanity. Faith also frames suffering. Illness, famine, death, all are explained as part of God's will, punishment for sin, or trials meant to purify. A sick child might be carried to the altar for blessing, herbs laid alongside prayers. A poor harvest is endured with fasting and supplication, voices raised together in hope of divine mercy. Even fear of demons, witches, or restless spirits is softened by the rituals of the church. Holy water sprinkled, its charms blessed, candles lit. The peasants live surrounded by forces they cannot control. And faith gives those forces names and boundaries. You picture the sound of the evening bell, slow and heavy, echoing across the village at dusk. Peasants pause in their chores, murmuring prayers before returning to their huts. The day closes, not in silence, but in ritual, a reminder that even darkness is ordered. Beyond the bell, the stars glitter, the same constellations seen by ancestors and descendants alike. But the bell ties them to earth, to the moment, to a life of obedience and hope. Inside the huts, small tokens of faith rest near the hearth. A wooden cross, a crude carving of a saint, a rosary of knotted cord. They are worn, soot-stained, yet cherished. In moments of fear, a storm breaking over fields, a cough that will not quiet, a rumor of raiders. These small symbols offer solace. They remind peasants that though they are bound by lords and rents, there is another master above all, one who sees their toil and promises rest in the life beyond. Fate does not erase the grueling nature of peasant life. It does not lighten the plow, soften the bread, or ease the wool's scratch, but it shapes those burdens into meaning. To bow, one said, at the sound of the bell, is to remember that even hardship is not wasted. It is part of a vast order stretching from soil to sky, from hunger to hope. As you stand in thought outside the village church, the last light fading behind its tower, you feel the calm of that order settle into you too. The bell may be distant, the Latin unfamiliar, but the rhythm is steady, enduring, and in its slow toll, you hear both command and comfort, the structure of a life that would otherwise dissolve into endless labor. To live as a peasant in the Middle Ages is to live by the seasons. The soil itself is a calendar, the fields a clock. There are no pocket watches, no calendars hung upon walls, only the rhythm of sowing, growing, harvesting, and resting. Each season brings its own burdens, and each year repeats the same cycle, generation after generation, until the pattern becomes as familiar as breathing. Spring sowing in hope. When the frost is loosened and the ground softens, peasants return to the fields with renewed urgency. Oxen drag the wooden plows through wet soil, their hooves sinking deep, their breath steaming in the cold air. Men guide the plows, hands raw against rough handles, while women scatter seed in broad sweeps, grain falling like rain onto dark furrows. Children follow behind, brushing soil over the kernels with bundles of sticks. The work is muddy, backbreaking, and relentless. Each field must be sown quickly, before the rains overwhelm, before weeds take hold. Yet spring carries a strange hope as well. The air smells fresh, the trees bud pale green, birds sing along the hedges. Hunger from the long winter lingers, but the sight of seed disappearing into soil offers a promise that in time, food will return. Every step across the muddy fields is a prayer as much as a task. Summer, endless weeding, endless light. When summer comes, the days stretch long, the sun heavy on shoulders, bent in the fields. The crops grow, but so do the weeds. Peasants spend hours stooping low, pulling, cutting, hoeing, trying to keep wheat and barley from being choked. Sweat runs down backs, shirts stick with dust and grime. The air buzzes with flies. There is little shade and no pause. The bell rings for prayer, then again for return, and the hoe is lifted once more. Yet summer is also a time of growth beyond the fields. Gardens near the huts bloom with beans, cabbages, leeks, onions. Children run barefoot, their shouts carrying across the meadows. Cows graze, pigs forage in the woods, bees hum lazily over clover. Work never ceases, but the world feels abundant for a short while. Still, peasants know it is only preparation for what comes next. Harvest. Autumn, the frenzy of harvest. When the grain ripens golden, urgency fills the air. The entire village pours into the fields, sickles in hand. Men, women, children, all bend low, cutting stalks quickly, binding sheaves, stacking them into stooks that dot the fields like short towers. Time is against them. A storm could flatten the crop, damp could rot it, frost could steal it. Every day is precious. The work is exhausting, hands blistering from the sickle, backs aching from bending. Yet there is also a strange energy, a communal rush. Voices call across the fields, laughter breaks through the sweat, songs rise to keep rhythm. Grain is carried back to barns, threshed with flails on hard floors, the chaff winnowed by tossing it into the wind. Dust fills the air, coating hair and skin until everything smells of straw. When the harvest is complete, relief spreads. Granaries stand fuller, though much of it will go to lord and tithe. What remains is precious, measured carefully against the hunger of the coming winter. The harvest is both a celebration and a reckoning, joy tempered by fear of whether it will be enough. Winter idleness and hunger. When the fields fall silent, peasants' bodies finally rest. Plows are stored, oxen fed from hay, tools repaired by firelight. The days are short, the nights long, the cold pressing through walls of wattle and daub. Cave families huddle close, cloaks doubling as blankets. The hearth, the only light and warmth. Yet winter is not true leisure. It is the season of hunger. Bread grows harder, porridge thinner, ale weaker. Root vegetables are dug from storage pits, their skins shriveled, their taste bitter. Meat is scarce, usually only salted scraps of pork, hung and preserved to last until spring. Each meal is smaller, each mouthful more precious. Bellies rumble at night, children cry, parents hush them with promises of spring. Still, Winter allows small comforts, spinning wool, weaving cloth, mending tools, tasks done indoors by firelight. Stories are told, songs sung, simple games played with bones or sticks. Snow muffles the outside world, and for a time, the pace of labor softens. Yet, beneath it all lies the knowledge that hunger sharpens as the months drag on. Winter is endurance, a waiting season, a test of whether autumn's work was enough. Through these seasons, peasants learn patience. They cannot rush spring, nor slow summer's weeds, nor pause autumn's urgency, nor shorten winter's hunger. They endure each in turn, bound to the soil's rhythm. You feel that rhythm settle into you now. The inhale of sowing, the exhale of harvest, the long stillness of winter's breath. The seasons turn, and the peasants turn with them. Each year, another verse in the same unending song. In the midst of toil and hunger, another shadow always hovers over the peasant's life. Illness, a cough that lingers, a fever that burns, a wound that festers. These small beginnings can mean disaster in a world with little defense against sickness. For peasants in the Middle Ages, health is fragile, and medicine is a mixture of herbs, prayers, and hope. You picture the village in late autumn, the air damp and cold. Smoke clings low, the hut smelled straw and bodies. In one, a child coughs, deep and raw, the sound rattling in the chest. Mother lays a hand on the child's forehead, feels the heat rising. She has no doctor to call, no powders or syrups waiting in a cabinet. Instead, she reaches for what she knows. Herbs gathered in the summer, tied in bundles and hung above the hearth. Chamomile for fevers, mint for stomach pains, willow bark for aches. A handful is crushed, boiled into a bitter tea, pressed against the lips of the child. The mother whispers a prayer as she does, making the sign of the cross, calling on saints as much as on plants. Healing is never certain. Sometimes the fever breaks, sometimes it deepens, and always it feels less like a cure than a plea. The village healer, often an older woman, sometimes a midwife, knows the uses of roots and leaves better than most. She gathers nettles, sage, garlic, and fennel. She binds wounds with cobwebs, soaks rags in vinegar, lays poultices of mashed herbs upon swollen flesh. Her hands are steady, her knowledge born of memory, not books. Yet her cures are uncertain, her reputation shifting with outcomes. If someone recovers, she is praised. Someone dies, whispers may follow. Was it fate or fault or something darker? Charms and amulets are common. A cord tied with knots, a small bag of herbs worn around the neck, a scrap of parchment with a saint's name. These are not separate from medicine, but part of it. Illness is seen as spiritual as much as physical, a punishment, a curse, or a trial. The church blesses holy water, priests pray for the sick, relics are touched to fevers. Faith and folk remedies weave together until they cannot be untangled. In childbirth, the dangers are especially great. Women labor on straw beds, attended by neighbors and midwives. Ease, pain, prayers fill the air. Charms hang above the bed. Sometimes the child cries, and relief spreads through the hut. Sometimes silence follows, heavy and final. For mothers, survival is never certain. Each birth is as much a risk as a hope, and families accept both outcomes as part of the order of life. Diseases sweep through villages without warning. A wound from a sickle can rot, the flesh turning black, the smell sharp and sour. Dysentery spreads through water, striking whole families with fever and weakness. In some years, famine weakens bodies, and sickness follows swiftly. And when plague arrives, as it would in the 14th century, death comes so quickly that even prayers feel too slow. The peasants' knowledge is limited, yet they adapt. Scarlet cloves are hung in doorways to ward off illness. Fires are kept burning to chase away bad air. Herbs are strewn on floors, their scents masking foulness. Washing is rare, but sometimes hands are rinsed in cold streams before meals. Every small act becomes both custom and protection, even if only in belief. You imagine standing in the dim light of a hut, watching a healer crush leaves with a stone, mixing them with fat to spread on a wound. The smell is sharp, green, and bitter. The patient lies still, face pale, breath shallow. A candle flickers beside them, its wax dripping slowly, as though measuring the time left. Round the patient, family members sit silently, their eyes lowered, their hope fragile. Healing here is not guaranteed. It is a waiting, a prayer, a test of endurance. And yet, even with constant illness, life continues. Some recover, their bodies hardened, their resistance sharpened by survival. Others die, their families mourning briefly before necessity pulls them back to the fields. The rhythm of labor leaves little room for grief. Illness is not an exception, but part of life itself, woven into the same cycle as sowing and harvest. You breathe in slowly, imagining the scent of smoke, herbs, and damp wool. You feel the uncertainty of those lives, how every cough, every cut, every fever might tilt the balance. And you sense their resilience too. They did not expect ease, only the chance to endure another day. Medicine was not science, but memory. Not certainty, but faith. And in that fragile mix, they survived, century after century. When you step back into the peasant's hut, you see not only smoke and straw, but the family itself, the true center of medieval life. A peasant's world is not solitary, just crowded, noisy, and always shared. Its kin live together, sometimes 3 generations under one thatched roof, all bound by necessity. Privacy is a luxury no one expects. Warmth, work, and survival come only in numbers. The hut holds a single main room, its earth floor uneven, its walls darkened by soot. In the dim light, you can see how every space is used. At the far end, a low bed stuffed with straw lies against the wall. Parents and infants share it. Beside it, another pallet of straw where children huddle together. Grandparents, if they are still alive, rest near the hearth on mats, close to warmth. At night, the room is filled with the sound of bodies breathing, of coughs breaking the silence, of a baby crying, of someone shifting in sleep. To rest here is to rest within a chorus of family. Children are not idle. From the moment they can walk, they are put to small tasks. A boy of 6 might carry water from the well in a wooden bucket, sloshing and spilling along the path. A girl not much older gathers eggs or helps spin wool beside her mother. By 10 or 12, children join adults in the fields, pulling weeds, guarding animals, scaring crows from grain. Their hands blister and harden early. Their backs stoop before their time. Childhood, as you imagine it, does not exist here as a separate stage. It is simply the beginning of work. The family divides labor, though lines blur. Men guide plows, chop wood, repair tools. Women tend animals, spin, weave, cook, and keep gardens alive. Yet, when harvest comes, everyone bends low together, sickle in hand. Children run through stubble, gathering stray stalks, while grandparents watch, offering advice or murmured prayers. Survival allows no idle hands. Meals are taken together, around the rough wooden table or seated on the floor near the hearth. Bowls of porridge are passed, bread sliced and shared, mugs of ale handed down. The family eats from the same pot, spoons dipping in turn, the children quieted when they quarrel. Conversation is brief, often about weather, crops, or obligations. Laughter comes sometimes, especially from children. But more often, the meal is steady, silent, focused on filling bellies. Quarrels happen with so many bodies in so small a space. Tempers flare. A child refuses work. A man drinks too much ale. A woman complains of hunger or the Lord's demands. Voices rise, but just as quickly, they fall. Life is too hard to waste on resentment. The next morning, everyone returns to the same tasks, the same fields. Family is not chosen, but bound. Disputes dissolve because necessity requires it. Affection is quiet, but present. Our mothers smoothing a child's hair before sleep. Our father showing his son how to hold a hoe properly. Grandparents telling stories by the fire, tales of saints, of old harvests, of years of famine and survival. These stories bind the family together, teaching children patience and endurance. In a world where books are rare, memory itself becomes inheritance. The family is also fragile. Illness can take a child in days. A mother may die in childbirth, leaving infants to be nursed by kin or neighbors. A father may perish in accident or war, leaving the family to struggle with obligations they cannot escape. Grief is felt deeply, but life presses forward. The hut does not empty, it tightens, drawing survivors closer. Endurance becomes the only inheritance, stronger than death. At night, when all are inside, the hut hums with sound. The creak of rafters, the hiss of fire, the cough of an elder, the shifting of bodies on straw. The air is heavy with breath, smoke, and the smells of wool and earth. Yet within this closeness lies security. Outside, the night is vast, cold, and full of unseen dangers. Inside, however crowded, there is warmth and life. The family huddles together like embers, glowing faintly in the dark. You let yourself sit at the edge of the hearth in thought, watching the family around you. Children curled in sleep, their faces smudged with dirt, their hair tangled. Parents murmuring briefly before settling into silence. Grandparents breathing heavily, their bodies worn but still present. The fire's glow paints the hut in red and gold, shadows swaying on soot-stained walls. It is cramped, harsh, even suffocating at times. Yet, it is also the center of endurance, a fragile but stubborn fortress against the hunger and cold outside. In this closeness, you understand why peasants endured as they did. Alone, no one could face the weight of soil, obligation, hunger, and illness. Together, they could. The family was not comfort in the modern sense, but necessity, a binding that gave meaning to survival. And as you listen to the sound of their sleep, you feel that necessity soften into something else, a quiet dignity, born not from wealth or power, but from endurance itself. When you leave the peasant's hut in thought and step out into the wider countryside, your eyes are drawn to what always dominates the landscape, the manor, and sometimes, beyond it, the castle. They rise above the fields, not only in stone and timber, but in meaning. For the peasants, they are reminders, daily and unrelenting, of the hierarchy in which their lives are bound. The manor house is the nearest. Compared to the low huts of wattle and thatch, it seems almost another world. Built of timber or stone, larger, with multiple rooms, and sometimes even a hall, tall enough to let in real light. Its roof is steep, its walls thick, its entrance guarded by stout doors of oak. It is not a palace, but to the peasants, it might as well be. Here lives the Lord, or his steward when he is absent, the one who holds claim over the very soil beneath their feet. Every field they plow, every loaf they bake, every pig they raise is shadowed by the manor's presence. It reminds them of the rents owed, the labor demanded, the justice dispensed in its halls. The reeve, the bailiff, the clerks, all issue commands in the Lord's name. Even when the Lord himself is away, riding to war or attending court in some distant city, his power remains visible in the manor's walls. It is a structure of authority as much as of stone. Beyond the manor, in some regions, towers the castle. Its walls of gray stone loom high, crenellations sharp against the sky. At its base, a moat or ditch. At its heart, a keep, tall and cold. For the peasants, the castle is not home, but fortress. It promises protection in times of raid or war, a place to flee when danger sweeps across the fields. Yet, it is also a reminder of distance. The life within those walls, with its banquets, tapestries, and nights, and polished mail, is as far from the peasant-esque smoky hut as the stars are from the earth. You imagine standing in a field, the plow in hand, sweat running down your back. You pause, looking up toward the silhouette of the castle. It is solid, unmoving, while you bend and toil, your body aching. It promises safety, but only if you fulfill your dues. It embodies strength, but strength that is not yours. The sight stiffens your resolve, but also weighs your heart. Hierarchy is not abstract here. It is built into the very landscape. On feast days or times of judgment, peasants are summoned to the manor. They walk in groups, their clothes patched, their faces sun-darkened, carrying baskets of grain, jars of ale, or small animals as payment. The hall within is dim but larger than any hut. Its floor paved with stone, rushes strewn fresh, the air cool. At the high end sits the lord or his steward, raised on a dais, his chair tall, his voice echoing. The peasants stand below, bowing their heads, speaking only when spoken to. Here the hierarchy becomes flesh, the authority of one set against the obedience of many. Even justice belongs to the manor. A thief caught in the village is brought to the hall, tied or guarded. The lord hears the case, issues punishment, a fine, a beating, a few days in the stocks. The peasants watch, silent. The Lord's word is law, and no one disputes it. Yet at the same time, the manor is not only power but order. Without it, chaos might sweep in. Bandits might raid, rival lords might burn fields, disputes might spiral into violence. The manor, harsh though it is, keeps the rhythm steady. Children in the village grow up with these structures always in view. They learn early to glance at the castle on the horizon, to bow when the steward passes, to carry dues to the granary without complaint. Their games may imitate knights, but their lives will never reach the keep. Still, the symbols impress upon them the shape of the world, a pyramid of power, with peasants wide at the base and lords narrow at the top. You feel this hierarchy in the very air of the countryside. The huts crouch low, scattered in clusters. The manor rises above them, firm and commanding. The castle, further still, looms like a watchful eye. The peasants labor below, their lives small in comparison, but essential, for without their toil, the manor's kitchens would empty. The castle's granaries would bare, the whole order would crumble. The peasants endure the weight of hierarchy, yet in their endurance, they also uphold it. As you stand in thought, the sun sets behind the distant tower. Its outline glows red against the sky, while the huts below sink into shadow. The contrast is sharp, yet both are part of the same landscape, bound together by need and by power. The manor and the castle remind you, as they reminded every peasant, that life was never equal here. It was layered, ordered, and unyielding. And within that order, the peasants found their place. Hard, low, but steady. Most days in a peasant's life are bound by soil, hut, and obligation. The rhythm is steady, the palette, gray and brown, fields of earth, smoke-blackened walls, coarse wool, dull porridge. But now and then, a different rhythm breaks through, bringing color, sound, and movement into the monotony. These are the days of markets and fairs, rare but eagerly awaited, flashes of life that remind peasants of a wider world beyond their strips of land. The village market, the weekly or monthly market, is modest but vital. Stalls of rough timber line the green or the space near the church. Its baskets overflow with turnips, onions, beans, and eggs. A butcher lays out cuts of salted pork, the smell strong in the air. Fishermen from a nearby river spread their catch on boards, the scales shining faintly, even in weak light. A woman sells cheese wrapped in cloth, its sharp scent drawing buyers. The peasants arrive with their own goods to trade, sack of barley, a clutch of eggs, a hen held under one arm. Some come with small crafts, carved spoons, woolen yarn, clay pots shaped by hand. Coins are scarce, so barter is common. A bundle of garlic might be exchanged for a measure of salt. A jug of ale swapped for a skein of yarn. Voices overlap in low tones, deals struck quickly, hands clapping together in agreement. For the peasants, the market is more than trade. It is a gathering, a chance to see neighbors from beyond the village, to hear news from nearby towns, to catch rumors of weather, taxes, or war. Peddler spreads out small wares, bright pins, ribbons dyed in faded colors, knives with sharp edges. Children stare wide at such treasures, though most families cannot spare enough to buy. Still, to see them is a marvel, a reminder that beauty exists even in small things. The yearly fair, greater still, are the annual fairs, often tied to holy days or feast days of saints. These are true spectacles for peasants who rarely travel. Fairs draw not only villagers, but merchants from distant towns, pilgrims, and even entertainers. The air is alive with sound, bells ringing, fiddles playing, voices shouting above the crowd. Here, color bursts forth. Cloth merchants display bolts of fabric dyed in deep blues, reds, and yellows, far brighter than any peasant's daily wear. Spices scent the air, cinnamon, pepper, saffron, exotic and costly. Their aromas, strange to noses accustomed only to smoke and cabbage. Traders lay out knives, pots, beads, and sometimes even rare trinkets of glass or metal, objects that gleam against a drab earth. Children run through the crowd, eyes wide at jugglers tossing balls, at dancers stamping in rhythm, at a bear led clumsily by a chain, its handler calling for coins. Kay's storytellers gather listeners, their voices rising in tales of kings, saints, and battles. For a moment, peasants step outside their grueling rhythm and glimpse a life of marvels. Food at the fair is richer too. Roasting meat crackles over fires, its fat dripping into flames. Cakes sweetened with honey are sold in small pieces, rare treats that children savor slowly. Jugs of ale flow freely, loosening voices, turning quarrels into songs. The air is thick with scents, unlike the hut, sweet, sharp, smoky, all mingling in a dizzying cloud. The return to routine for peasants. Markets and fairs are not escape, but brief relief. They cannot afford the merchant's silks or the spices from far lands. They return with little more than they brought, perhaps a knife, a scrap of bright ribbon, a clay pot. Yet the memory lingers, of sound, of color, of a world beyond furrows and huts. Even after the fair ends, talk continues for weeks. The juggler's tricks, the merchant's wares, the bear that danced. When they return to the fields, the soil feels heavier for a time, the hut darker, the bread blander. But the fairs bring something more than goods. They bring connection, a sense that life, though bound to earth, touches something larger. The peasants may not travel far, but the fair brings the world to them, just for a day. The meaning in the monotony, you imagine yourself walking among the stalls, the air alive with shouts, music, and smoke. You pause at a basket of apples, red against the brown earth. You hear the crack of a drum, the clink of coins, the laughter of children. And then, as dusk falls, you walk back along the dirt road to the village, carrying your bundle of grain or your scrap of cloth, the sound of the fair fading behind you. By the next morning, the rooster crows again, the bell rings, and the hoe bites into earth. The gray routine returns. But in the mind of the peasant, the fair lingers, a memory of brightness in a world of endurance. A brief glimpse of color against the monotone of survival. For the medieval peasant, no force was more relentless, more intimate than the weather. The soil might be theirs to till, the tools theirs to wield, but the skies determined whether their labor bore fruit or ended in hunger. Every day, every season, they lived at the mercy of rain, sun, frost, and wind. Nature was not backdrop, it was master. Rain and mud. Too much rain could ruin everything. A downpour might flatten fields of barley just as they ripened, leaving the stalks matted, the grain lost. Heavy rains turned paths into streams, huts into swamps, and fields into sucking mud. You picture peasants trudging through it, boots caked, carts stuck fast, oxen straining in mire. Side the huts, leaks drip steadily through thatch, straw floors grow damp, and smoke hangs thicker in the air. The smell of mildew lingers, clothing never quite dries, and coughs deepen in chests. Yet rain was also life. Without it, seed would not sprout, streams would shrink, wells would fail. The peasants watched the skies anxiously, praying for the right balance, enough to feed the soil, but not enough to drown it. Every cloud carried both hope and fear, drought and dust. The other extreme was just as cruel. In dry summers, fields cracked open, the earth hard as stone. Seeds refused to sprout, grass withered, animals grew thin. Dust blew across villages, coating skin, sticking in throats. Wells sank lower each day, and women walked further with buckets, their backs aching from the weight of water. Children coughed in the dust, their lips cracked, their bellies shrinking as food grew scarce. Drought meant famine. Failed harvest rippled through every hut. Carry, bread grew smaller, porridge thinner. Families slaughtered animals too early, unable to feed them, trading survival now for hunger later. Hope shrank with each shriveled stalk, until prayer was all that remained. Cold and frost. Winters pressed hard, especially when frost came early or lingered too long. Fields lay barren, animals grew gaunt, and fuel ran short. Families huddled around small fires, cloaks pulled tight, breath white in the smoky air. Frost crept into fingers and toes, turning skin raw, cracking lips. Food dwindled, stored grain running out by midwinter. Children whimpered at night, bellies empty, while parents whispered comfort they barely believed. Cold killed quietly, not only through hunger, but through sickness. Coughs deepened, fevers spread in damp huts. Sometimes whole families weakened together, unable to rise, unable to feed the fire. Outside, snow muffled the world, but inside, silence grew heavier still, hunger's weight. Hunger was not rare. It came in waves, each year testing the limits of what families had stored. In years of poor harvest, hunger sharpened into famine. Peasants chewed bark, boiled nettles, ground acorns into bitter flour. Bread grew dark and harsh, stomachs cramped from eating what bodies could not easily bear. Parents gave food to children first, their own frames growing thinner. Infants died quickly. The old followed soon after. Even in better years, hunger pressed. A day's labor burned more than a day's food could replace. Pellies rumbled at night, sleep broken by emptiness. Work was done slower, steps heavier, thoughts dulled by lack. Hunger was constant company, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but always there. The peasants' endurance, and yet peasants endured. They read the sky with care, noting clouds, winds, the flight of birds. They stored grain in pits, salted pork, dried beans, hoping to stretch food through lean times. They shared among neighbors when they could, finding survival together. Faith gave shape to hardship. A storm was God's will, a famine his test, a good harvest his blessing. Rituals accompanied every extreme: prayers for rain, processions for sun, blessings for seed, fasts for forgiveness. You imagine standing in a sodden field, rain dripping down your back, your hands numb with cold, or walking across cracked earth, dust rising around your ankles, the sun burning overhead, or sitting inside a hut in midwinter, listening to the sound of a child's hungry cry. The weather presses close, inescapable, dictating each breath, each step, each meal. Yet, you also feel the strength that grew in this constant struggle. The peasants did not collapse at the first hardship, for hardship was the very shape of their world. They bent, but they endured, season after season, storm after storm. Beyond the fields and huts, another weight pressed on the peasant's life: the rules of justice. To survive was not only to endure hunger and toil, but also to remain within the laws of the manor, the village, and the church. For peasants, justice was not blind. It was public, physical, and always tied to power. The village court. Each manor had its own court, held in the open air or in the Lord's hall. The villagers gathered, summoned by bell or steward, to hear disputes and witness punishments. A reeve or bailiff called names. A scribes scratched the notes. The lord or his steward presided from a raised chair. The peasants stood below, their heads bowed, their voices low. Cases ranged from the petty to the serious. A man caught stealing wood from the Lord's forest. A woman accused of letting her pigs wander into another's field. A neighbor quarreling over the boundary of a strip of land. These were heard and judged quickly, with fines imposed more often than physical punishment. The peasants grumbled, but they paid, sometimes in coin, more often in grain, poultry, or labor. Justice was another form of rent, stocks, and pillories for more visible offenses. The punishment was public. In the village green stood the stocks, wooden boards with holes for hands and feet, where offenders were locked for hours or days. The pillory held the head as well. A man placed there could not move, could not hide, his shame displayed before all. Villagers passed by, sometimes mocking, sometimes silent, sometimes throwing refuse. Children laughed, dogs barked, the offender endured. The punishment was not only discomfort, but humiliation, a reminder to all of what happened when rules were broken. You imagine walking through the village and seeing a man in the stocks, his head lowered, his hands trapped. The air smells of straw and mud, of sweat and smoke. People glance at him. Some sneer, others look away quickly. The lesson is plain. The community polices itself through shame as much as law. Fines and dues. Most punishments were fines, and these could weigh heavily. A man unable to pay might owe more labor on the Lord's fields. A family might lose part of its harvest, leaving bellies emptier in winter. The burden fell hardest on the poor, which meant nearly everyone. To stumble outside the rules was to invite a hunger sharper than any storm. Harsh punishments, more serious crimes, brought harsher measures. Thieves might be whipped or branded. Repeat offenders could lose an ear, a hand, or even their lives. Just was swift and often brutal, carried out before the eyes of the village. A hanging on the green, the body left to swing in the wind, was not only penalty, but spectacle. It reminded peasants that order was not optional. Witchcraft accusations were rarer in the early Middle Ages than later, but suspicion still hovered. A healer whose herbs failed, a widow living alone, a quarrel that ended in illness. These could all bring whispers. Fear of the unseen, joint fear of the law, binding villagers even more tightly to conformity. The role of the church held its own courts for sins and moral offenses. Adultery, failure to tithe, breaking fasts. These brought penance rather than stocks, but the weight was real. A sinner might be forced to stand barefoot before the congregation, to confess aloud, to walk in procession, carrying candles. Shame, again, was the tool, as sharp as hunger. For greater sins, excommunication threatened, cutting the peasant off from the community of faith. A punishment feared more than physical pain. Acceptance and feared peasants did not expect fairness in the modern sense. They knew justice favored the Lord, the manor, the church. Yet they also accepted it as part of the order of the world. To them, punishment was not random, but woven into the same fabric as rent, hunger, and weather. It was simply another way to endure. You imagine standing among villagers gathered for a court day. The air is still, the sun muted by cloud. A man stands, accused. The reeve reads his name. The steward frowns. A fine is declared, a mark noted. The man bows his head. Then another case, and another. Life continues, but the message is clear. The Lord's word shapes the bounds of survival. Justice in the Middle Ages for peasants was not an ideal, but a tool to preserve order, to enforce dues, to display power. And peasants, weary and wary, bent beneath it, just as they bent beneath the plow. For centuries, peasants lived under constant hardship, hunger, toil, cold, and sickness. Yet in the middle of the 14th century, a shadow fell that dwarfed every other hardship they had known. It was sudden, merciless, and vast. The Black Death swept across Europe, and for peasants, it brought a terror unlike anything they had endured before. The arrival of plague, it began in whispers. Travelers brought news of a strange illness spreading from distant lands, of whole towns falling silent. Then, in villages, it appeared suddenly, a cough, a swelling beneath the arm, a fever burning hot and fast. Within days, the body grew, covered with dark blotches, breath turned shallow, and life slipped away. Entire families vanished within a week. You imagine a peasant village in summer, fields green and heavy with grain. Yet in the huts, silence grows. A man who worked the fields yesterday now lies motionless on a straw bed, his skin marked with black sores. A mother clutches her child, only to see the same fever rise in the child's face. Spreads faster than the illness itself. The scale of death, the plague spared no one. Old and young, rich and poor, lord and peasant. Yet peasants, crowded in smoky huts, their lives, close to animals, were especially vulnerable. Whole villages were emptied, doors left open, fields abandoned. The church bells rang constantly, tolling for the dead, until their sound became a background to life itself. Bodies piled faster than they could be buried. In some places, carts moved slowly through villages, the driver calling out for the dead to be brought forth. Pits were dug outside the village, wide and deep, filled with straw, then with bodies, then with earth again. The smell was heavy, inescapable. For those who survived, grief became dull, numbed by repetition. To mourn each loss was impossible when loss came daily. A child buried one morning, a neighbor that evening, a spouse by week's end. The peasants bowed their heads, whispered prayers, and continued, unsure if they would see another dawn. Fear and faith, fear shaped every moment. Some believed the plague was God's punishment for sin. Processions moved through villages, peasants barefoot, carrying candles, chanting prayers for mercy. Priests lifted crosses, sprinkled holy water, burned incense in hopes of chasing away the disease. Others looked for earthly causes, bad air rising from swamps, strangers carrying curses, stars misaligned in the heavens, charms and amulets multiplied. Herbs were hung in doorways, garlic strung above beds, smoke thickened in huts to ward off foul air. Families carried small crosses or saints' tokens, pressing them to lips as coughs spread around them. None of it mattered. The plague ignored both charms and prayers, cutting through villages all the same. The disruption of order with so many dying, the order of society trembled. Fields went untilled, crops rotted, animals wandered untended. The manor, once so powerful, could not protect. Lords fled to distant estates. Priests died alongside their flocks. Justice and dues faltered when there were too few left to enforce them. For a moment, the rigid hierarchy seemed fragile as the bodies it ruled. For peasants who lived, survival brought strange consequences. Labor grew scarce, and suddenly their work became more valuable. Wages rose in places, obligations lessened. Some peasants moved to better land, abandoned by the dead. For the first time in centuries, a small shift occurred. The balance between lord and serf, tilting, however slightly. Out of immense loss came the faintest whisper of change. The memory of plague, even after the first great wave passed, its memory lingered. Children who had survived grew into adults, marked by what they had seen. Villages emptied, families gone. Silence where once there was labor and song. They carried that memory into every season that followed, always fearing its return. You pictured the empty green of a village after plague, doors unbarred, fields overgrown, a church standing silent. The wind moves softly through thatch, but no smoke rises, no voices carry. The absence itself is heavy, a silence louder than any bell. For peasants who survived, this emptiness was as terrifying as the sickness itself. Fragility and endurance, the Black Death, showed peasants more than ever how fragile their lives were. Hunger could be endured, whether survived, obligations met. God, but plague came like a storm of death, unstoppable, unanswerable. Okay. And yet, even after it, peasants endured. They planted again, they mended huts, they bore children, they told stories. The memory of plague haunted them, but it did not end them. You let yourself feel that fragility now, the way every breath could once have been uncertain, every cough a warning, okay? And then you feel, too, the persistence that followed, the way life returned even after so much had been lost. The Black Death was terror, but it was also proof. The peasants, bound to soil and hardship, could endure even this. If the Black Death showed peasants how fragile life could be, the soil reminded them of how fixed it remained. For most, the place of birth was also the place of death. Generations lived and died on the same strips of land, in the same huts, walking the same paths between fields, church, and manor. Movement was rare, and change even rarer. The soil bound them as surely as chains. Rooted lives. You imagine a child born in a smoky hut, his first cries muffled by woolen blankets rough against his skin. He grows into boyhood, his feet bare on the dirt path to the fields. He learns to scatter seed, to swing a sickle, to carry water from the well. In time, he marries a girl from the same village, whose life mirrors his own. Together, they raise children in that same hut, under the same thatch. When his body grows old and bent, he is carried to the churchyard. Buried in earth, he is known since birth. His children remain, taking up the hoe, the plow, the same endless rhythm. This was the pattern for most peasants. Movement beyond a few miles was uncommon. To leave the village was to leave protection, obligation, and the ties that made survival possible. Travel required permission from the Lord, often a fee, and few dared to risk it. Only in times of famine, war, or plague did some abandon their land, seeking better fields or safer places. For the majority, life was rooted, deeply, unshakably. The landscape of repetition, the land itself, reinforced this stillness. The open fields stretched in familiar strips, each season bringing the same duties: plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting. The huts decayed and were rebuilt with the same wood, the same thatch, the same earth floors. The church bells tolled the same hours, year after year. The manor collected rents as it always had. Nothing new, nothing surprising, only the slow pulse of repetition. Generations overlapped in this rhythm. A grandfather taught his grandson to hold a sickle, telling him which weeds to pull, which to leave. A mother passed down spinning and weaving to her daughter the same patterns her own mother had taught her. The continuity was unbroken. Memory replaced novelty, endurance replaced change. The occasional traveler, yet now and then glimpses of the wider world arrived. A peddler with ribbons or spices, a pilgrim passing through, carrying tales of distant shrines, a wandering minstrel with songs of kings and battles. For peasants, these visitors were marvels, their stories as strange as dreams. But once the traveler left, the fields remained. The soil pulled life back to its familiar rhythm, as if nothing had ever stirred it. Even when peasants went to nearby towns for fairs, they did not stay. The noise, the color, the crowd were dazzling, but the fields always called them back. Their survival was not in streets or markets, but in soil and seed. The land did not allow them to wander far. Stability and weight, this rootedness gave a kind of stability. Peasants knew their place, their tasks, their obligations. There was little uncertainty about tomorrow. It would look much like today. Children grew into the roles of their parents, same calluses forming on their hands, the same aches settling into their backs. The world beyond might change. Kings rising and falling, wars fought far away, but the village rhythm remained largely untouched. Yet this stability was also weight. Dreams of something different rarely took root, for there was no soil for them to grow in. To imagine another life was to imagine the impossible. Even rebellion, when it came, was brief, crushed swiftly, the peasants returning to their furrows. The soil was both cradle and chained. The sense of belonging still. Many peasants felt belonging in this rootedness. The land was harsh, but it was theirs in memory, if not in law. They knew every rise and hollow, every tree by the boundary, every curve of the stream. Ancestors lay buried in the churchyard, their names remembered in stories, their bones part of the same soil. This continuity gave meaning, a thread connecting past to present, binding generations into one long endurance. You imagine standing on the edge of a village green, looking out over fields. Children run, their laughter carrying faintly. In the distance, men guide plows, oxen leaning into harnesses. The church bell rings, the same as it did for their parents, the same as it will for their children. The rhythm is steady, unchanging, as familiar as breath, rootedness as rest. For modern thought, such stillness may seem suffocating. For peasants, it was life itself, both hardship and solace. To be rooted was to know the soil deeply, to belong to it, even as it demanded everything in return. Their endurance was not just survival, but a quiet acceptance that life was not about change, but about carrying on. You feel that rootedness now, the weight of soil beneath your feet, the pull of the same rhythm, the same cycle, year after year. It is heavy, but also grounding. In a world of toil, repetition itself can be a kind of rest, a pattern steady enough to carry a fragile life through the centuries. When you look back across the peasant's world, the smoke-filled huts, the hard bread, the calloused hands, the endless demands of lord and church, you might wonder how such lives did not collapse into despair. And yet, century after century, peasants endured. Their survival was not loud or celebrated, but quiet, steady, and deeply human. There was dignity in that endurance, even if it was rarely seen. The rhythm of necessity. Peasants knew that life was harsh, but they also knew it was continuous. Each dawn followed another. Each season returned in its turn. The plow cut the soil, the seed sank, the rain fell, the harvest came, not always bountiful, but always returning in some measure. This rhythm, unchanging, gave them something to hold. Even in grief, even in hunger, the cycle went on. To step into the fields each morning was to step into that rhythm, and in it lay both burden and comfort, strength and community. They endured because they did not endure alone. Families huddled in huts, kin shared tools, neighbors lent oxen, whole villages gathered for harvest. A poor family might be helped by another. A widow's field might be sown by neighbors. The bonds were practical, born of necessity, but they were also human. A shared hardship created a shared resilience. A laugh at a feast, a song sung in the field, a story told by the hearth. These bound peasants together as tightly as debts and duties. Small joys as anchors. Even in scarcity, small joys mattered. The warmth of a cloak on a cold morning, sweetness of honey and porridge, rare but treasured. The sound of children's laughter chasing across the green, the glow of a midsummer fire, the rhythm of a village dance, the hum of a song in the fields. These were not luxuries, but anchors, brief moments of light that balanced the shadows. They reminded peasants that endurance was more than survival. It was life, however modest. Faith as framework, faith also gave meaning. The bell that tolled the hours, the Mass on Sundays, the saints' feast days scattered through the year, all shaped suffering into something bearable. Illness became trial, famine became penance, death became passage to rest. Even if peasants did not understand every word spoken in Latin, the ritual itself gave order to chaos. It told them their lives mattered, not to lords perhaps, but to God. That belief carried them when little else could. Acceptance without defeat. Peasants did not mistake their hardships for fairness. They knew the lords ate better, dressed finer, lived safer. They grumbled, sometimes resisted, sometimes rose in brief revolt. Yet, in daily life, most accepted the burdens not with defeat, but with a kind of stubbornness. They bent, but did not break. Their dignity lay in this acceptance, a refusal to stop moving, even when each step was heavy. The memory they left. Generations of peasants lived and died without their names recorded, their deeds unsung. Yet their endurance built the world. The castles rose on the backs of their labor. The churches stood on their tithes. The lords feasted from their harvests. Their own huts vanished. Their bones returned to the soil. But the rhythm they kept sustained centuries of kingdoms and faith. Their dignity was not in fame, but in persistence, a quiet strength that underpinned everything. You imagine walking once more through a village at dusk. The huts glow faintly with firelight. A dog curls at a threshold. Children's voices fade into yawns. Mothers hush them softly. Men return from fields, shoulders sagging, but their steps steady. The church bell tolls, echoing across the fields, folding the day into silence. Life is hard, but it goes on. You feel that endurance in yourself as you breathe slowly, evenly. It's not triumph, not glory, but something gentler, a steady, caring, day after day. And in that steadiness, there is dignity, a quiet flame that does not burn brightly, but never goes out. The day of the medieval peasant stretches long, but even it must end. As the sun dips low, the horizon glowing faintly red before surrendering to gray, the fields grow still. Tools are gathered, wooden handles worn smooth by endless hands. Oxen, slow and patient, are led back toward pens, their heavy hooves sinking into the softening soil. The voices that filled the day fall quiet, replaced by the faint stirrings of night. You walk slowly along the dirt track, the air cooling against your skin. The scent of the fields lingers, damp earth, straw, smoke drifting faintly from chimneys. Villagers return in small groups, shoulders bent, baskets half empty, bodies aching from labor. Their steps are unhurried, not from leisure, but from weariness. The day has taken its toll, and now the night must carry what remains. Inside the huts, fires are stoked, small meals prepared. The smell of porridge, of bread reheated on embers, fills the smoky rooms. Children eat sleepily, their eyes heavy. A father mends a tool by the fire's glow, his hands steady despite their cracks. A mother hums softly, rocking an infant to sleep, her voice no louder than the fire's hiss. Conversation is brief, a comment about weather, a muttered prayer, a sigh. The hut grows darker as the fire dies down, until only faint embers glow red against the ash. Outside, the village itself quiets. The church bell tolls once, marking the end of the day. Its sound drifts across the fields, low and steady, fading into silence. Chickens roost in coops, pigs snort softly in pens, dogs curl against thresholds, their ears twitching at distant noises. The world shrinks to simple sounds. The crack of a twig, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind in the thatch. Above, the sky opens into stars. They shine with cold clarity, the same stars that peasants have seen for countless generations, the same stars under which they plowed, sowed, and harvested. The moon lifts slowly, its pale light silvering the fields, turning the furrows into soft lines of shadow. The land that demanded so much by day now lies calm, as if sleeping itself. You walk once more to the edge of the field. The soil is cool beneath your hand, the furrows damp with dew beginning to gather. The silence here is not empty, but full of memory, of labor, of breath and sweat left behind in the day. You sense the weight of all who have bent over the soil, generation after generation, their endurance pressed into the earth itself. The field holds it quietly, patient, eternal. The huts grow silent, one by one. Doors close, firelight fades, only faint glows remain beneath thatched roofs. Inside, families lie close together on straw, their breathing mingling in rhythm with the night. A child shifts, murmurs in sleep. An elder coughs softly, then settles. The rest is not deep. Hunger, smoke, and cold press close, but it is rest enough to begin again when the rooster calls. You remain with the silence, the night wrapping around you. The sky stretches infinite, the earth firm beneath you, the air cool against your face. You breathe with the rhythm of the peasant's sleep, slow and steady, your body loosening with each exhale. The fields, the huts, the church, the manor, the burdens, the songs, all of it fades now into stillness. What remains is the quiet endurance of lives lived close to soil, lives grueling but dignified in their persistence. And as the moon rises higher, the village sleeps deeper. You let yourself sink into that same rest. The weight of the day falls away. The sounds of toil dissolve into silence. The stars remain, the fields remain, the rhythm remains. And you, too, drift into stillness, into the long patience of sleep, as deep and enduring as the soil itself.